Navio, 2 hours after Wyatt's incarceration. "Do you understand what I'm asking of you, Galt Tirome?" Clara asked softly, but her voice was heavy, menacing. Galt nodded slowly as he and his comrades rested on their knees before the princess. "My princess, even if you had not asked us to testify in favor of Lieutenant Wyatt, we would have done so regardless. He saved our lives, and more than that, he fought against the Drazen raiders with honor and in such a way that I've never seen anyone approach ship-to-ship combat before." "I'm happy to hear that your gratitude is genuine," said the princess, her tone relaxing slightly. "Although I'm surprised that all of you are not bothered by the fact that Lieutenant Wyatt Staples is a mere commoner." "Normally that would be the case," Galt replied as his companions chose to remain silent. "But if there's something I've learned throughout my career is that in battle, ranks, noble and military matter very little when there's a gun pointed at your face. I've faced pirates, rebels, and all sorts of criminals before, my princess. When I started my service, I viewed them as fools and idiots who stepped out of line with the system that defines our great principality. Whenever a pirate vessel refused to surrender, I used to think, how dare they disobey their betters? That was until one of them boarded the magnificent Luster when I was but an ensign. I nearly died that day, but a commoner saved me at the cost of her life. I didn't know her, she just died to save my life." "That event changed your views?" Clara asked, interested. Galt nodded. "It did, Your Majesty. After that day, instead of seeing her sacrifice as merely her duty as a commoner, I wanted to honor her in some way. I began to learn more about commoners, their restrictions and their duties, and realized that we were not so different. I practically hold no power within House Tirome. I belong to a branch house, and even then, I'm so far removed from the candidacy line that I might as well not be there. Joining the military was my only opportunity to earn recognition and accolades." Cynthia, standing next to Clara, spoke up next. "You mentioned that you served on a battlecruiser. The Grace of Divination, if I recall correctly. What led you to that position?" "A good record, faithful service, and bravery in battle, Lady Cynthia," Galt replied. "I soared through the ranks, married, had my daughter, and I was content with my position and duties, until I and many others started to see strange deployments and restructuring across the first patrol. By the time I was handpicked by Lord Samuel and transferred to the Samuel's Glory, now the Navio, it was already too late to do anything about the coming coup. House Tirome is subservient to House Caiston, and instead of sending potential heirs to serve, they sent those already in the military," Galt explained, sharing a quick glance among his kneeling comrades. "Each of us has similar stories. Very few were Caiston loyalists to the core, but the commoners, they had little choice but to obey. You're a sensible, reasonable man, Galt Tirome. That much I can appreciate. I have been informed that your actions, and that of those that followed your example, were of great aid during the battle against the Drazen," Clara began. "However, as traitors, my orders were clear. No prisoners are to be taken, and yet, here you are. All because of a commoner took pity on you." Galt didn't flinch under her cold gaze, but he accepted her words without shame. "Wyatt Staples is the sole reason we are alive, my princess. This I know. To go against your orders, will you punish him for his insolence?" "I would under normal circumstances." Clara's expression softened. "But his decision proved to be useful to our cause. We gained the Navio, a powerful and advanced vessel. Sparing your lives not once but twice ensured your cooperation and, most importantly, it allowed said vessel to participate in the battle properly. Your treason can be overlooked thanks to his actions, but what am I to do with you?" Galt Tirome bowed his head before replying. "Your Majesty, I implore you, spare the rest of my crew. They have families and were only following orders given by Lord Samuel. Only I knew about the encryption key and his intent. If any of us has to die, let it be me. However, if I may ask, will Lieutenant Wyatt live?" Clara and Cynthia paused for a moment before the princess replied. "Why would you worry about his well-being, Lieutenant Commander?" "I do not know the lieutenant, but he spared our lives, and then twice after one of us disrespected him gravely. He only punched the insolent woman unconscious, and I highly doubt that he knew he had the right to execute us for such a transgression. Even if did, I don't believe he would have done so. He is a man of integrity and honor, that much I can tell. Furthermore, and I pray I do not sound kowtowing, but during the battle against the Drazen, never in my life have I been more eager to follow a man's commands. Commoner or not, Lieutenant Wyatt saved many lives and obtained a victory that would have ensured the promotion of a captain into a rear admiral's seat, Galt explained. And therein lies the key problem, Clara said, her tone cold and calculative. You, all of you, saw him take command of the Nornavio. Even if it was through a convenient loophole, a commoner sat at the command chair of a ship and took to battle with it. Such a thing cannot be allowed. He will be sentenced to death. Galt looked up at her in disbelief, and his mouth went agape. She smiled, and her expression softened once more. Or that would be the case were it not for the fact that everyone of importance believes my bodyguard was the one in command of the Nornavio during the battle. Galt, alongside his comrades, was visibly relieved upon hearing her words. Then, we've become a liability, he reasoned, and we must be silenced in order to save him. Had you not provided aid, much like the 13 among you that turned their backs on humanity due to their egos and misplaced loyalties, you would be dead right now, executed and disgraced, like they have been dealt with already, she stated matter-of-handly. Some of the kneeling men and women whispered amongst each other, muttering the names of the deceased and lamenting their loss, but no outrage sparked. So what am I going to do with you? Killing us would be the best solution, Your Majesty. Silencing those who can't be trusted with such information for the sake of a greater good, Galt replied, shaking slightly. For what is worth? I will aid the lieutenant during his trial however I can. The truth shall die with me. I swear it on my daughter's life. Clara smiled slightly at that. There is no need to go that far, Galt Tirome. As an act of mercy, I shall make all of you an offer. Renounce Duke Draymore's actions, renounce your oath to the houses that you serve, renounce House Caiston, and swear an oath to me and House Astor, and I shall see to it that you are pardoned from your crimes and allow you to serve my brother, the prince, once more. I have already besmirched the name and honor of my house by disobeying the last command of Lord Samuel. The standing within my house is likely dead, regardless of the outcome of this conflict, Galt said, but once again bowed his head slightly. Lieutenant Wyatt mentioned that I had the power to make a choice. He chose to fight for the principality. Now you, my princess, present us with the chance to choose without a choice, death or fealty. I never threatened your lives, Galt Tirome. Accept my offer, and when my uncle is defeated and my brother returned to his rightful seat, you shall be rewarded for your loyalty whilst the traitors shall be dealt with. Your families and loved ones shall be safe, for the enemy shall not know that you still live. Refuse it, and as a show of mercy instead of a blade, you shall remain imprisoned and later judged fairly, said Clara calmly. I have no interest in giving people false hope or fake choices, Galt Tirome. Do you and your companions accept my offer or not? Galt turned to his comrades, and all of them nodded slowly one by one. Closing his eyes, he turned to the blonde woman and bowed his head deeply. Princess Clara, we, the surviving crew of the Samuel's Glory, surrender our lives to you, and swear loyalty upon your name and that of House Astor, renouncing our previous oaths to our treacherous lords and ladies. Clara smiled. I'm relieved that you've seen reason, she said, and turned to leave with Cynthia behind her, leaving Galt Tirome and his comrades to be escorted to the Nornavio's brig by 5 Royal Marines. Once the two women were walking down an empty hallway, she continued. That was easier than I expected. Galt Tirome is a sensible man. His comrades trust him to speak for them, too. He's a good officer, albeit bound and ensnared by protocol and etiquette. He's a career military man, Clara. It seems Wyatt's interference was more than fortunate. He shall be useful, Cynthia added. We shall see, Clara countered. Cynthia, be honest with me. Do you think I'm making a mistake by giving presumed traitors a second chance? Cynthia hummed deeply. Galt and the rest of the crew were instrumental in our success. Without an AI, even our capabilities were stretched to the limit during the battle. Truthfully, I would have executed them without his intervention when the Nornavio was captured. Wyatt's decision to take them as his prisoners proved to be beneficial. I say they deserve their second chance. Their actions shall be closely followed, and they will be removed if they squander your mercy, Clara." Clara hummed softly. "Thank you, Cynthia. I too believe that they have earned their pardon. What convinced me that they may be salvageable was that most of them were able to look past the barriers that separate commoners and nobility. How many could choose to obey a commoner even if it was to fight a monstrous enemy? Such a thing would drive half of the Royal Navy officers mad with indignation at the mere thought of having that option presented to them," Clara said with mild disdain. Cynthia nodded, softly chuckling as she did so. "I will enjoy seeing the faces of many during the trial. Insulting a royal to her face? A dangerous proposition." "A surefire way to get the attention of the traitors within our midst, if nothing else," Clara agreed. "But for now, there's much to do and much to prepare." "Clara," Cynthia called out, "do you think it'll be wise to elevate Wyatt into nobility? He's made numerous remarks, both in person and through actions, that he doesn't like nobility, and to make him a knight banneret? Even for you, that's dangerously reckless and a high thing to ask the prince for." Clara came to a halt and turned to face her best friend with a tender smile. "If his outlandish plan is successful and the traitors are exposed, then none shall question his ennoblement. If it fails and he dies, a posthumous elevation will be accepted. If it fails but he survives, then many will complain. Likely William, George, and Frederick will be the loudest voices, but ultimately it will go through a royal decree. Wyatt has earned at least that much." "That doesn't answer my question, Clara," Cynthia pressed on. Clara sighed softly. "I suppose it doesn't, but Wyatt has no option in this matter. He shall become a knight banneret of House Astor, and shall serve directly under my authority. Brother Dearest isn't the only one who has a keen eye for talent." Cynthia crossed her arms and smirked. "Aha, admit it. You just want a personal fighter pilot for you to exploit. Will you bribe him with sweets and snacks? He seems to thoroughly enjoy those." Clara blushed profusely and raised a finger at her friend. "Shush, you!" Then turned around with an indignant huff and walked away while Cynthia chuckled in victory, following closely behind her friend and princess. Present time, Woodshaft. Clara was brought out of her stupor when Cynthia placed the two important and valuable pieces of paper in front of her. She had barely slept at all, but she was ready to properly conclude the deal she had forged with the master of Woodshaft, Uriel Hoax. Taking the pen and preparing her signet, she smiled contently. Wyatt watched as Clara signed the promised papers, and then, after placing a seal on them both, she handed them over to a waiting Uriel Hoax, who took them graciously. He spent a minute or two reading them and then smirked, chuckling to himself. "It is done," said Clara with a serious yet friendly tone, still diplomatic but bereft of the stoicism that he'd seen her use during their first meeting. "As agreed, the destroyers are yours and so are the freighters. Over 20,000 personnel have taken your offer and signed on. Despite the casualties we took, having the prince himself come to save them and seeing Royal Marines in action, knowing a princess was here and refused to leave them behind, really motivated many to follow you, princess," Uriel Hoax said as he took a cigar and put it in his mouth, lightening it with his prosthetic. "You also got 2 large haulers and their surviving crew if you'll have 'em. Poor bastards, they got hit the hardest by the Drazen when they arrived. They can't pay their dues to the Castons anymore, so they'll throw their lot with you, princess." "They shall be welcomed once they are approved," Clara replied with a smile. "What about my mercenaries?" "Signed on as ready to go. Plenty of my now ex-guards, a few sewer rats, ruffians, and squatters joined them after feeling pretty damn inspired. Heard the bastards managed to stand their ground and held out against 20 of those damned walking plants before one of your watchdogs came to finish the job. Congratulations, princess. You got yourself over 500 barely worth a damn greener-than-leaves mercenaries." Uriel jested before taking a long drag out of his cigar. "They will be useful, somehow," Clara replied, not terribly enthused. "Is it just me, or does she sound disappointed by that?" Wyatt thought, glad that his helmet hid his playful smirk. "You got plenty of independent engineers, mechanics, technicians, electrical specialists, comms specialists, EVA personnel, and more to keep your ships working. Just, without much discipline on their records." He jested once more, but to his credit, it wasn't as apparent this time around. "They're your people and your problem now, Princess." "Will Woodshaft be able to survive without them?" the princess asked, showing mild concern. "With them leaving and the casualties we took, that leaves a pretty big hole to fill. But Woodshaft never stays empty for long. More will come. Especially now that the caste and local forces have been gutted, the Third Fleet seems to be in shambles. And with the brewing conflict, I doubt they'll be able to spare a significant force just to take us over. Many will come seeking refuge and perhaps deserters and valuable ships. We'll need 'em," Uriel clarified before taking another long drag. "All in all, it was a good transaction. The Caiston station is now mine and will make a fine addition to my home." "What if another Drazen raiding party comes along?" Wyatt asked, concerned. "Unless they are as strong as the raiding party that tried to hit us, I doubt we'll see any more of those kindling fuel abominations in quite some time. Just in case, I'll see to it that we prepare a protocol for quick evacuations. I would not like to become part of their feed," Uriel growled with disgust. "Otherwise, we'll do all right. For what is worth, you have my loyalty and my thanks, Princess. Long live House Astor and all that," he said, waving a hand dispassionately. "I thank you for your earnest and sincere declaration of support and cooperation, my dear Uriel," Clara replied in a similarly dismissive, nonchalant tone, which caused the long-haired man to chuckle in approval. "Now that business is done, you," Uriel said, turning his gaze at Wyatt, "must be Wyatt, the Woodshaft ace." He barked a merry laugh. "You are crazy! I saw your battle through the scanners and later through leaked footage from your fleet." He chuckled deeply. "Congratulations," said the man, extending a hand to Wyatt. Wyatt accepted it and shook hands with Uriel. "It was a stupid mistake on my part. I was lucky I survived that encounter." Uriel ended the shake and glanced at Clara and Cynthia, noticing the way they sat and smirked, narrowing his eyes. "Ah, so you're a commoner? Princess, I didn't know you mingled with such individuals," he teased, stopping himself from saying something offensive. "I never said that Wyatt was a noble when you asked, now did I?" Clara replied, her composure unchanging. Wyatt blinked, pausing for a moment, then realized what he had done. "Since I'm a noble now, I shouldn't shake hands anymore with others. No, if I'm going to be a noble, then I'll be one on my own terms. I won't let that change me or define me. I refuse," he thought solemnly and filled with unflinching determination. Then he nodded and gave Uriel a respectful salute. "I'm no longer a commoner, but I am by birth, Uriel." Now it was Uriel's turn to open his eyes and looked confused. "You're a commoner by birth? But that would mean that you got elevated, or did you buy a knight title?" "You can tell him, Wyatt," came the voice of Clara through his implant. "I was ennobled not too long ago. Yesterday, in fact," Wyatt revealed. "I'm a knight banneret." Uriel coughed violently, regretting his choice to inhale as Wyatt revealed the information. Well, I'll be damned. Ha! Let me guess, you belong to House Astor?" he said, glancing at the princess. Clara put a hand over the other and tilted her head slightly. "Your advice was certainly useful, my dear Uriel. I took it to heart." "Advice? What advice?" Wyatt asked himself, but a moment later pushed the thoughts aside, figuring that if it was important, Clara would tell him eventually. "You really do have dangerous, sharp fangs, my princess," Uriel complimented. "If I may know, where are you from? We get plenty of visitors from across 5 sectors, and I'd like to give the Woodshaft ace a gift of my own as a show of goodwill, you know?" Wyatt waited for a moment, but when he didn't receive a command from Clara, he took the initiative. "Volantis. Volantis, Volantis, Gimor territory," Uriel recalled, and his eyes flickered for a few moments. "Hope you enjoy my gift? The traitor died during the assault, and not many have a taste for Lachoa." He turned to Clara. "Should I send it to the Nornavio along with the other supplies?" Clara nodded, but Wyatt perked up at the mention of the bugs. It had been far too long since he ate a Lachoa. Clara's sweets were far more delicious, but he had a soft spot for the tasty bugs. He licked his lips without realizing it. The princess stood up, and so did Uriel. "Our deal is done. The fleet shall depart from Woodshaft tomorrow. Thank you for your cooperation, Uriel Hoax. May your future ventures be fruitful," she said, and Uriel bowed his head, taking a drag from his cigar and exhaling the smoke through his nostrils. The trio left the room and were escorted back outside, where 10 Royal Marines waited for them. Now that everyone knew who she was, even more people gave her ample room and showed reverence as she made her way through the station. "Would you like to visit the station, Clara?" Wyatt asked, remembering their original plan during their first arrival. "Your offer is appreciated, Wyatt, but I think I'd like to return to our ship and continue with the preparations. Do you wish to venture and find dried meats and toasted beans?" she replied. She remembered something so trivial, Wyatt noted before replying, "No need. After the Drazen assault, I doubt I'll find any whatsoever. I have some spare time on my hands, and I don't know what to do." "In that case," Cynthia joined in, "why don't you join us? Clara is going to meet with a select few personnel chosen by Redford himself and give her approval." "Being the captain of a ship is certainly more annoying than I originally believed," Clara admitted with a deep sigh. "But if it is part of my new duties, then I shan't complain too much." "I obey," Wyatt replied, smiling softly. He followed the princess until they reached the dock that the Noir Navio was stationed at, and he paused for a moment to admire the deadly but beautiful ship. There were personnel in EVA suits and small drones flying about as they loaded supplies and small containers into the ship, under the watchful eyes of Marines hand-picked by Juliana herself. "They haven't stopped loading since we left," he commented offhandedly. "Uriel was rather generous with what he could give. Take pride, Wyatt. You were instrumental in safeguarding this place," Cynthia replied. Wyatt wanted to reply, but no words formed in his throat. They boarded the elevator and he watched all around him, seeing people working throughout the many docks of Woodshaft, tending to ships, civilian, freighters, and Royal Navy vessels alike. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel proud of what he'd done. He had aided in the defense of Woodshaft and had killed many Drazen in the process. Perhaps, he thought as he glanced at Clara and Cynthia, and he relaxed, feeling at ease, perhaps I'm not entirely worthless after all. When they reached the top, they found Commander Redford examining several people lined up before him. Among the humans, he spotted 8 Ikantis in their suits. He focused on the Ikantis and smiled. While he held no particular fondness for the hierarchy, he was surprisingly fond of the smaller avian aliens and had come to know plenty about their culture, their lifestyle, and the hierarchy. The aliens were small, barely reaching past 4 feet in stature when fully grown. Their legs were typical of most avian species, but the Ikanti had 6 toes ending in small but sharp claws. Their legs made up a third of their total size and were dense. They were also flightless, as they evolved away from soaring in the sky, unlike most avians tended to evolve. Throughout hundreds of thousands of years, they had lost their wings, except for a pair of small, colorful vestigial wings on their backs that only served for mating purposes. How that worked, Wyatt didn't know. Instead, they were built for running, intelligence, agility, and dexterity. They explained their tails, as they needed them to balance their weight and center of gravity when running. Their tails were nearly a meter in length, not just feathers like the once Clixol had. They stood up straight, giving them a very human-like appearance, and even had 2 arms that ended in 6 dexterous fingers tipped with short claws. Despite their small size, Ikantis were as strong as a regular human, and their kicks were legendary and lightning fast. Their torsos were also similar to a human's, but their chests were almost entirely made out of a hard rib cage that protected their hearts and lungs, while their stomach were slim as a general rule. Also, surprise, surprise, no breasts, which made it incredibly difficult to tell male from female for strangers. The difference was found in the feathers that ran from the back of their heads all the way to the tip of their tails, and that were also present across their forearms, thighs, the wings on their backs, and the sides of their necks. Males had shorter feathers, usually ranging in blue, green, yellow, and orange colors. Females had longer, brighter feathers, and their coloration ranged from turquoise, aquamarine, lavender, and several shades of pink. The rest of their bodies were covered by a layer of smooth gray fur, regardless of gender. Finally, their faces. Their beaks were pointy, like that of a spear, but they were short. They had 6 eyes, two facing forward, two smaller ones located a little behind their first set, and the third set was located nearly to the sides of their heads, giving them an incredible vision range and field of view. Unsurprisingly, they lacked the immense variety of facial expressions that humans possessed, but they weren't devoid of them. Wyatt liked the Yakanti, and he had never met one that he disliked too much. He chuckled at that. Granted, every Yakanti I've met pretty much doesn't fill the mold of the hierarchy. I don't know if that's good or bad, he thought as he approached his commanding officer. You! The energetic voice coming from a translator suddenly cut through his comm system. Wyatt blinked in confusion until he saw a Yakanti barely past the meter-tall mark step out of line and point a finger at him with a shaky arm. "Excuse you? How did you enter my—" Wyatt asked, but was cut off when the Yakanti stepped angrily toward him, eyes fixated on him. He came to a halt a few steps in front of him, eyes blazing with indignation as he strained his neck upward to glare at him. "You are the bumbling ape that wrecked that fighter I saw in the hangar, aren't you? Do you have any idea how much time I'm going to spend fixing her up before she can fly again?" "No, of course you don't, you crazy fool," the Yakanti said, somehow standing imposing against the much taller human. "You better thank me for fixing her up, you bumbling worm brain." Excuse me, what?" Wyatt replied, taken aback by the awkward situation. "Who even are you? How are you speaking with me right now?" "I hacked your comms," the Yakanti explained, as if it was the natural thing to say. "Principality defenses are always crappy. Name's Jincho, the best damn technician the hierarchy ever produced and threw away because they are a bunch of featherless shitholes. Pleased to meet you." "Wait. No. Not pleased at all. How dare you wreck such a beautiful fighter?" Confused, he turned to Clara and Cynthia, who, judging by their body language, found the situation thoroughly amusing and wouldn't come to his aid. Then he looked at Redford, staring at the transpiring event dismissingly, but no more than that. Frowning, he crossed his arms. "I didn't have the luxury of making sure the paint wouldn't be scratched, you know? Going up against Drazen fighters tends to end badly for everyone involved." "That's no excuse to treat her like that, maniac," Jincho countered, angrily stomping on the ground. "A fighter should always be pristine like a work of art and remain untouched or find a worthy end in battle. What you did to that poor fighter ruffles my feathers to no end. Just you wait. I'll fix her up better than new." With that said, Jincho cut off the connection and grumbly walked back to the line alongside the other Yakantis and the several dozens of equally confused, amused humans watching the confrontation play out. Despite what had transpired, Wyatt found himself smiling. "Well, that happened. I already like him," Clara's voice cut through next. "He's rather energetic." "And grumpy," Cynthia added with humor in her voice. "We have a long day ahead of us. Come, let us proceed," Clara proclaimed, advancing toward the waiting Redford while the Royal Marines adopted a relaxed stance. Wyatt nodded and turned to face the endless blackness of space. He frowned, and he felt his heartbeat increase. No matter what happens next, I'll be ready for it. For the Principality, for the Prince, Duke Draymore will be stopped. A faint smile spread across his lips. Commander Redford was right. I made the right decision, he thought resolutely, before taking his place next to Cynthia while Clara and Redford went through the new crew members of the Noir Navio. And for the first time since he was a child, he felt truly at peace. End of Book 1. The prince stood before the map representing the Principality's up-to-date political situation. He silently thanked his good fortune that nothing had changed in favor of Duke Draymore's faction despite that his own forces were also unchanged. With the territories of House Astor more or less held at bay and locked in a stalemate, he couldn't expect any help to come from there anytime soon. The same could be said for House Winfield, but he was certain that they were fighting against the Draymore forces or had consolidated, gathering their strength and likely trying to recall whatever loyalists they could reach. As was the right of the great houses and many minor houses, most of them were neutral on the conflict. Loyalty was a shifting thing and to most people a matter of convenience and opportunity. The prince wanted to sigh and rub his temples in exasperation as his mind ran through a plethora of diplomatic options, petty grievances between houses, false claims of loyalty, opportunistic deals made in the shadows, traitors and turncoats on both sides waiting to strike, and the countless other details that eluded him due to miscommunication, distance, and veiled intentions of those waiting to gain from the conflict that his uncle had created. Of the great 10 Astorian Royal Navy fleets, the 3rd, the 6th, the 9th, and about 2/3 of the 10th had sided with Duke Draymore. The 3rd came as an unforeseen development, being the smallest, weakest, and least honored fleet of them all. The 6th was of no surprise, since more of their elements came from Draymore territory. The 9th and the 10th were, again, not a surprise given their proximity to Draymore space. The fact that a 1/3 of the 10th Fleet had decided to remain loyal was a surprise, and now they were lost somewhere, a ragtag remnant most likely hiding from Draymore forces. On his side, though, things were much darker. The 1st, the 2nd, the 4th, the 7th, and the 8th Fleets remained loyal to House Astor, but only the 2nd and 8th Fleets remained intact. The 1st, 4th, and 7th Fleets were, thanks to the efforts of Admiral Damien, able to disengage a great portion of their forces into Winfield territory before Draymore forces crippled more of their vessels. It was also thanks to him that the Exalted Virtue, one of the most modern battlecruisers part of the 1st Fleet, had been saved to begin with and now served as his personal flagship. He didn't know what happened to the remnants of those fleets after escaping, but he knew they were fighting alongside the Winfields. The 2nd and 8th Fleets were scattered across Valto, Finnegan, and Kalen territories, likely fighting in small-scale skirmishes against Draymore forces, keeping them pinned there for the time being. His only solace was that, if his speculation was correct, at least half of the 2nd would be waiting for his arrival at Macha. Only the 5th Fleet remained entirely neutral, which surprised him nothing given who its fleet admiral was, and he doubted that the 5th would choose a side until a clear winner manifested itself. That suited him well. The 5th was in charge of stopping any incursions that the Arabian Commonwealth could launch into Principality space. The fleets are one thing, but each house is entitled to own their private ships if they can afford them, the prince muttered to himself, as yet another source for his mounting headache was added to the raging thunderstorm that was his mind. And some have small fleets or powerful ships at their disposal. That goes without taking into account civilian-class ships, stations, satellites. I wish Alexander was here. I hate large-scale logistics. It is not your forte, brother dearest, but do not besmirch your efforts. Alexander may be capable of organizing and micromanaging anything he's in charge of, but he's too close-minded and can hardly see the bigger picture. You, on the other hand, can, Clara replied, before taking a sip out of her drink, humming pleasingly at the sweetness of it. I pray that both he and Giovanni are safe, and that our remaining siblings are being treated fairly. A traitor he may be, but Uncle Cornelius is an honorable man. He wouldn't stoop so low as to hurt them willingly. Let us hope that his honor is not as brittle as his loyalty, the prince replied. That, too, is my hope, brother dearest, Clara said and stared at the map, her eyes focusing on the edges that pointed at their 5 closest neighbors. To the northwest, the Yakanti hierarchy. To the west, the Drazan collective. To the southeast, the Arabian Commonwealth. To the northeast, and thankfully the farthest of them, the Zarma-Jalar-Katiloalka Compact, or Zarma Compact since the name was a mouthful, a collection of different species of aliens that were always in conflict with their neighboring rivals, the Tilgor Alliance. Finally, to the north, the Albion Federation could be found, and beyond them, the Imperium, the Qin Shu Commonality, the Society of Tabax, and many more. But diplomatic relations with other human nations, excluding the Arabian Commonwealth, were limited but friendly. The only reason they kept even that much contact was due to the required yearly transmissions and updates that they shared as part of the Pax Humanitas, a safeguard that united all human nations in a way and prevented them from completely ignoring each other. Technically speaking, they had a 6th neighbor, yet another human nation, but they were so far removed that they were a non-factor. And just like the Arabian Commonwealth, the isolationist Diviners were not part of the Pax Humanitas. While not much was known about them, they were to the Principality what the Principality was to the vast majority of the other human nations in terms of power and technological advancement. Her eyes narrowed as she discarded dangers and focused on the 3 main threats that could take advantage of the chaos spreading across the Principality. "We will surely see an increase in Drazan raiders," she said with disgust. "The Akanti hierarchy might see a chance to strike at us. I hope they stay their hand, or that they are far too occupied dealing with their internal struggles for them to take interest in our moment of weakness." The prince nodded. "Which leaves the Arabian Commonwealth as our ever-constant, persistent external threat. The Fifth Fleet has always been more independent than the rest and focused on their duty. I would like to gain Timon's support, but I'd rather have him stay put. The last thing we need is the Arabians thinking they have an easy way into the Principality." Clara giggled at that. "You've never told me the reason for your dislike of Fleet Admiral Timon Arnav. It began so suddenly, too. What changed, brother dearest?" "I detest the man, but I can't move against him," the prince replied, eyes narrowing. "He's a narcissist and an egomaniac. Were it not for his many accolades and victories over Arabian pirates and his tactical genius, I would have ordered him beheaded as my first official order as prince," the blond man replied, sneering. "He does not tolerate failure, and any offense, real or imagined, against him is dealt with swiftly and with deathly force." Clara was taken aback at her brother's reveal. She had thought it was something petty or some minor incident, not something so grave. "Brother dearest, why was I not aware of his demeanor?" "I was not aware of it until father passed away and I inherited the throne," he replied. "It is no secret that many nobles abuse their power. But some are much, much worse than others, and their criminal acts must be hidden within the data to protect their reputation or standing within both their respective houses and the military if they have a career in it." She was aware of that fact, of course. Commoners were so easy to abuse, and almost every time a noble would come unscathed from their actions. That her brother was willing to reveal that much without going into further details spoke volumes of the depravity of the famous, glory-hungry, and renowned Timon Arnav. "I was going to suggest reaching out to him at some point, but given this new information, I'd rather keep him where he is. No doubt Uncle Cornelius has thought the same." The prince nodded. "Too egregious to rely upon, too useful to eliminate." "Let's move past that unsavory topic, brother dearest. Our focus must be set on the now for the moment," Clara said. "Has Frederick revealed anything of value?" "Some names, all of them arrested or disposed of already. The QEC was disabled by some unknown means shortly after his capture. But we already know that the matching device was likely in possession of the now Fleet Admiral Cornelius Tigan. I doubt Fleet Admiral Carlos Valto yet lives. Damien will surely mourn the loss of his cousin." The prince paused for a moment. "Another possibility is that someone within House Caiston had possession of it. Probably Andrew or Tamarin Caiston." His expression hardened. "Frederick has proven to be remarkably resilient to interrogation. How he was able to conspire with Draymore loyalists still eludes us for the time being." The princess hummed deeply before speaking. "While I do not condone torture as a method for information extraction, perhaps it could, as Cynthia would describe, soften him up," Clara proposed, her expression darkening with grim resolve. "I'm certain Juliana would enjoy the chance to make that damnable traitor suffer within reason." The prince closed his eyes for a moment, then stared at his sister. "I've considered it, but I will not condone such methods just yet. House Anderson is officially neutral. I would not wish to push them to the Draymore's side. Frederick is one of their potential heirs and beloved within his house." "Fair," Clara replied, before taking another sip from her drink. "I wonder how much support he'll retain once his treachery is known." The prince remained silent for a few seconds before continuing. "The traitor threat has been culled. There will be a few remaining ones that will elude capture, but they will pose no more threat without their leader." "Let it be so, brother dearest," Clara replied. "Speaking of traitors and potential threats, why have you placed 20 Royal Marines under my command? That's nearly half of our remaining Royal Marines. I do not wish for you to remain unprotected. I have Cynthia at my side. At least take Milcades with you, brother dearest." The prince turned to face Clara fully and slowly walked over to her. Silently, he gently took hold of her right hand and caressed it while looking into her violet eyes with a soft smile on his face. "You stand above our siblings as my most beloved sister, Clara. I love you, sister dearest," he said, before gently inviting her to stand up. Once she did, he gave her a hug which she reciprocated. I want you to be as safe as possible. Is it not my duty as your older brother to see to your well-being?" Clara ended the hug a few seconds later, and her lips were curled into a soft, tender smile. "You're too caring, brother dearest." "As if you're one to give me a lecture regarding caring for others, Clara," the prince retorted, making her sister blush slightly in embarrassment. Letting go of her, he turned his gaze to the map. "There is much to do, and I want to keep you as safe as possible. I wish I could send you away into a remote part of the principality where this conflict could not reach. Alas, I can't. Allow me to give you as much protection as I can provide." As her blush vanished, Clara let out a defeated sigh. "Very well, brother dearest. If it is your desire and command, then I won't object any further. Regardless, are you certain you want to depart from Redford? We barely have enough pilots to fill 2 wedges, half of our current fighter capacity. He'd be of more use to you." "You may be correct, Clara, but I need my other commanders more for what's to come. Vivian and Lukacs have handpicked one of their best subordinates to act as your logistical and intelligence experts for the time being. Milcades will have to act as your chief of security and marine commander. I adore Cynthia, but she can't be trusted to command anything larger than a strike force," he said with some mirth in his voice. Clara smiled too, when her brother picked fun at their dear friend's expense. "And Redford shall be the overall commander of my ship while I remain as captain in name only. Splendid. You, my dearest sister, will deal with everything else and be in charge of them all. I certainly hope you are ready for the role," the prince joked. "Speaking of your ship, why, in Julius's name, did you name it Noir Navio?" "Oh?" Clara's expression turned sly and foxy. "Brother dearest, I merely agreed to the name. Why, I wouldn't have been able to come up with a name for such an outstanding ship so quickly, although I approve of the naming convention." "Oh no, it was not I who gave the ship its new name. That honor lies within our newly elevated knight banneret." The prince let out a long, profound sigh. You had every intention of ennobling him from the moment he achieved victory over ZTK 990, didn't you?" Clara smirked. "I had some reservations despite his display. What convinced me was his instrumental role in the battle. It was further cemented during a rather private moment we shared, and that I nor Cynthia will disclose, brother dearest." The prince raised an eyebrow. "Does he even know what renaming a captured prized vessel entails?" "Why would he? I'm certain that it'll be a rather splendid surprise when he finds that out," Clara replied, still smirking. "Regardless of my intent, the Nornavio is my ship. None shall object." The prince shook his head a couple of times before replying. "On that, Clara, you're correct. Oh, I nearly forgot. The Drazen captain finally broke. Milcades was not gentle, but our initial suspicions were confirmed. These raiders, and several other fleets, are striking across the nearest incursion points and bordering systems. This fleet detected our warp jump signatures, and a stealth probe sent ahead provided all the information they needed. The Drazen took a gamble, and fortunately for us, they lost." Clara was relieved to hear that the Castons, and by extension the Draymore forces, had not pushed the Drazen against them themselves. But she knew her brother well, and the tone he used ushered no respite. Instead, there was a cold feel to it. She quickly analyzed her brother's words once again and noticed the information that didn't match. How was it possible for several Drazen raiding fleets to strike across the Principality when the conflict had just started? The travel time alone from their usual cattle grounds outside Principality space would take them at least a month, without counting whatever meager forces were already inside the Principality launching their usual strikes. She frowned deeply. If they were not ushered by the traitors, then who did? Most likely whoever manufactured the black ships. They tipped off the Drazen raiders before the coup began, giving them enough time to travel in force and begin their assaults right when we were in complete disarray. Clara, the number of lives that will be lost thanks to them will be staggering. Without the fleets in their usual patrol routes and quick response stations, only in-system forces and house vessels will be left to defend those vulnerable territories. And we're powerless to send aid of any sort, Clara concluded bitterly. Many will blame House Astor for those assaults, and I'm certain many lesser and minor houses will be seduced by the Draymore traitors if they can defend their territories from Drazen incursions. It will make you look weak and incompetent. For the moment, yes, the prince agreed. Once we arrive at Matcha, we will rebuild our strength and bring the fight to the traitors. This cannot devolve into a civil war. I won't let it, he said decidedly. And I shall do everything within my power to help you, brother dearest, Clara said reassuringly. I will miss you dearly, Clara. I will miss Redford and Cynthia, too, he chuckled. I will even miss Wyatt. I finally found a player that stands at my lackluster level, and I have to see him go. Promise me you that will stay safe once you depart? I promise nothing of the sort, brother dearest. I shall, however, make every effort to not endanger my life needlessly, Clara stated with a soft but firm smile. The siblings stared at each other for several seconds, then shared a final tight but short-lived hug before the princess left the room, leaving her brother alone with his thoughts. Again! Cynthia commanded firmly as she watched over the beaten, broken, panting, sweating mass of flesh that was once a man named Wyatt Staples. The pilot was on the ground, clutching his stomach as he panted raggedly on the ground. Mercy, please, Wyatt breathed out, managing not to choke on his words as he tried to retain a measure of dignity by rolling to the side, flipping himself over to lay on his back. A vast improvement from his previous fetal position as far as he was concerned. This woman is trying to kill me, he thought in a panic as his gaze focused on a pristine and serious Cynthia Winfield wearing her usual red armor. A week had passed since their departure from Woodshaft, and, good to his word, the jump point Uriel Hoax provided kept them away from any possible Caiston, Tygan, or Third Fleet forces. The Nornavio, with Commander Redford sitting at the captain's chair, served as the fleet's primary scout ship, and it was a marvel to see her in action. He had not given it much thought after his short-lived command of the wonderful ship, but it truly was a magnificent vessel. The AI that was destroyed during the capture was replaced, restoring the Nornavio's navigational and communicational capabilities. The crew of the ship was mostly made out of Woodshaft recruits, except for key leading roles such as Chief of Engineering, Master Technician, chefs, and logistical and intelligence experts. There were hand-picked Marines by Commander Juliana herself and plentiful auxilia forces, not to mention the mercenaries that Clara hired, general crew members, and the Acantes, which, funnily enough, all of them were technicians and mechanics. Jincho in particular was a rather vocal fellow at the best of times, but he was earnest in his craft, and he had to admit the Acante was the best damn technician he had ever seen. He was still not done with the fighter he'd wrecked, but it was already looking as good as any of the other Raptor fighters in the hangar. He had even seen Galt Tirome and a few of the other nobles he vouched for, and while he had yet to talk with the red-haired man, Cynthia told him that he and the rest of the bridge personnel had so far been instrumental in teaching others how to operate the Nornavio correctly and how to access the ship's systems for maintenance and more. Surprisingly, no one seemed to mind their presence, and Jincho, above all, took in the knowledge and was as enraptured as he was with the deadly black ship. During that week, no major incidents had been produced. The Woodshaft recruits recognized him, and some even were brave enough to praise his suicidal heroics. It felt odd receiving praise from total strangers, but he welcomed it nonetheless. The nobles transferred from the prince's fleet were another story, though. They mostly kept their distance, but he could feel the eyes of envy and disdain sent his way. He didn't show it, of course, but damn it all, it felt good to not be ordered around by his betters for once. Of course, some nobles complained that their quarters were too small, others were outraged that the mess hall was not segregated, and a few even filed formal complaints that the commoner dregs were far too numerous and thus sullied such a beautiful ship. There were only 1,021 crew members aboard the Nornavio, and less than 20% of them were nobles. The ship still needed more personnel and effective elements to be properly fully staffed. For starters, it had no formal army personnel, and the auxilia forces and the mercenaries were to act as a replacement. There were also no ROSFs, no mechanized personnel except for the technicians, engineers, and mechanics, and only a handful of pilots handpicked by Commander Redford himself. Among them, the members of Epsilon Squadron, who he had interacted with only briefly during the past week, thanking them for speaking on his behalf during the trial. Cynthia and Redford, though, quelled any complaints, reminding everyone that the Nornavio was a captured vessel not made in the Principality, and that they would have to adapt to it, or they would face charges for insubordination. That soundly did the trick to shut them up, and now that he thought about it, he hadn't talked to Commander Redford or Clara since they left Woodshaft. Cynthia had taken command of him and made him train relentlessly, barely giving him any time that he could spend on doing anything else but eat, shower, and sleep. To call her a ruthless teacher was a grave understatement. "I'm sure I've got strained muscles and bruises in places I didn't know I had before," he complained silently, his fatigue mounting, but thanks to his implants, he could still keep going at the demented pace Cynthia Winfield was putting him through. Any moment to catch his breath was welcomed, and he made sure to stretch it as much as possible. "Again," Cynthia repeated, this time more firmly. Wordlessly, Wyatt groaned and slowly rose to his feet. First by rolling over again, then by going on all fours, and finally by shakily standing up. The gym area itself was quite ample, and none dared to linger for more than a few seconds on the spectacle that was him kissing the floor over and over again. Cracking his neck with a satisfying pop, he moved his shoulders before adopting a defensive posture. Tentatively, he rushed at Cynthia, throwing a jab that she eluded with ease. Immediately, he used his left heel as a pivot to shift to his right before throwing a second jab that was, again, easily dodged. Using his momentum, he jumped back and performed a roundhouse kick that Cynthia had painfully taught him on the second day of their reinstated training torture routine. The blue-haired woman caught his foot and with a swift motion twisted it, making him lose his balance. She was about to grapple him when she saw the pilot use the moment to his advantage. Instead of falling, he twisted his body so that his palms hit the ground first. Then, he used his free left foot to deliver a kick to her stomach. Wyatt felt a rush of dread wash over him when Cynthia merely blocked his kick with a raised knee. Before he knew it, he was in the air as the room began to spin all around him. Then he hit the floor and was followed by a strong and lightning-fast three-hit combo delivered to his stomach. 3 swift punches and the air left his lungs again, leaving him panting on the ground, writhing in pain. Again. That was impressive, Wyatt. You've improved significantly since our first training session. At this rate, we can leave the amateur techniques behind in less than a week, and I can start teaching you the basics of training," Cynthia said without a hint of sassiness, humor, or sarcasm in her voice. "Amateur techniques? Basics of training? This wasn't actual training? Then what the hell have I endured so far? What does this crazy woman mean? She's trying to kill me. Father, I regret it now. I want to join the diplomatic corps. I'll work my entire life at the wood mill. Weskull, sign me up for Clixal hunting. Anything has to be better than this torture," Wyatt cried out as he panted on the ground, his eyes unfocused as he began to ponder his life choices seriously. Before Cynthia could demand another round, a voice rang inside their minds at the same time. "Cynthia, Wyatt, suspend your training session for now. I require Wyatt's presence at once in my chambers. I won't take much of your time," Redford's voice said, and then the connection ended. Despite the pain and his ragged breathing, Wyatt managed to smile in utter relief after hearing the command. His eyes landed on Cynthia and saw her posture relax. She walked up to him and offered a hand. He took it and he was suddenly pulled up on his shaky feet. "You heard him, Wyatt. Go take a bath and don your uniform. We'll continue tomorrow." "Oh, of course. Thank you, Cynthia," he said through bruised ribs. Cynthia's expression softened slightly and a weak smile showed on her lips. "You're no prodigy, but you'll do." Then she let go of his hand and walked away, leaving him behind. Wyatt watched her back and blinked in confusion. What's that supposed to mean? He mumbled to himself before heading to the showers. After a quick but refreshing bath, he put on his uniform and saw himself in the mirror. He mockingly saluted his reflection before leaving to meet with his commanding officer. When he arrived at Redford's quarters, he was about to tell the AI that he was there when the door opened by itself. He entered the room and the door closed behind him. The commander's room wasn't that large, about twice as big as his old quarters back in the Exalted Virtue, a luxury by his standards, but he didn't know if Redford found the space claustrophobic. Stopping before his desk, he saluted respectfully. "Lieutenant Wyatt reporting, sir." "I see that Cynthia shows you no mercy," Redford replied with a knowing smirk. "She's quite the instructor." Wyatt opted for the more diplomatic answer as his muscles ached at the mention of the blue-haired woman. "Would you believe me if I say that Cynthia is much more merciful than Juliana?" Redford chuckled once before signaling Wyatt to take a seat. Wyatt, now that you are a knight banneret and a noble, I can no longer overlook your lack of knowledge regarding officer training. Henceforth, I shall directly instruct you on what you need to know: rules, etiquette, and proper conduct. I understand, sir. Thank you, Commander, Wyatt replied, his heart beating fast and suddenly feeling queasy. Officer. I'm actually going to have to be an officer now. I'm going to be terrible at it. I just know it. How can I compare to a noble trained to be an officer? As your first official role, you are now my second in command regarding our fighter forces. Including you, we only have 40 pilots. The pilots I picked were not the best of the best, but rather the least troublesome given our peculiar circumstances, he explained, and passed the flabbergasted pilot a datapad. Epsilon Squadron is no more. You shall command a new squadron, our most veteran and accomplished squadron aboard the Noir Navio. It may not be much, but Princess Clara deserves our best efforts and recognition of her forces. Redford clarified and stroked his chin for a moment before continuing. This datapad contains all the information available on our current pilots. You may select whichever 4 you want to be part of your squadron. Furthermore, you can, if you want, showcase your status as an ace and the veterinary insignias on your chosen fighter. And as a knight banneret, you may also display your heraldic shield. However, I advise that you don't. It could mark you as a potential target to enemy forces. Redford's expression was hard to read, but there was regret, exasperation, and sadness on his features for a few moments. Too many lives have been lost because of that display of needless hubris, he sighed, and his serious expression returned. Is that understood, Lieutenant? Wyatt looked at the datapad, then at Redford, blinked twice, and took the datapad. Understood, sir. I just have one question. Yes? Redford pressed. What will be the name of my new squadron? He asked, feeling uneasy yet oddly excited at the same time. In the span of 2 minutes, he had been placed right under Commander Redford, leading their limited and meager fighter forces, but it was so much more than he could have ever imagined. Not only that, but he got to choose his squad mates, too. Not even in his wildest fantasies something like that ever crossed his mind, which only made his heart race faster when he saw Redford give him a knowing look. Whatever you want, just, please, think of a better name than Nornavio. Wyatt saluted. I will try, Commander, and I think I know how to, he thought a second later.